Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. I'm Paul Lathrop, Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, Mark Pennak, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He is the spokesperson, and I believe you're also the president of Maryland Shall Issue, right?
Yeah, I am the president of Maryland Association.
Very cool. Mark, the reason I brought you on today, I wanted to talk about Maryland Shall Issue, and let's get into a little bit of the history of it first. When did Maryland Shall Issue get started, and why was it started?
It got started in the early 1990s, and a bunch of guys who's basically sitting around trying to try to do something about the gun laws in Maryland, which were at that time already severe. And they got together basically to form a nonprofit corporation, not for profit, nonpartisan, designed to educate people about the Second Amendment rights. This is before really even Heller had been decided, and there weren't any sense of constitutionality issues involved at all. But it grew from there, and we were have grown into an organization of close to 2,000 people and many more on our publication list,
Mm-hmm.
so that we have become a player in the local political scene, if you will, during Annapolis legislative sessions, because we lobby there and we litigate. And the whole idea there is to uh, the best informed person in the room when it comes to the guns and law.
Sure.
And that's what I am. I'm a member of the Maryland Bar and a member of the DC Bar. And I spent 33 years at the Department of Justice litigating. So it's something I'm very comfortable with and happy to do. It's kind of what I enjoy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit. Maryland, you're right outside of Annapolis. Is what 50 miles from DC. Uh,
Well,
the DC, I consider DC and New York City the two hubs of anti-gun legislation in the United States. So you're right next door to the worst of the worst, and you've had a fight on your hands. As Maryland Shall Issue had any successes in Annapolis?
yeah, and many of them unheralded, but we have had successes. And it comes from being the best informed person in the room because the people who are pushing these gun control agendas are typically very uneducated about Maryland's own existing laws and federal law. Now, I spent years litigating federal law, so I know it cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example. For a last legislative session, we had a bill that would have required mandatory background checks for private sales. And that bill actually was written in such a way that would encompass loans. So if I wanted to loan my shotgun to my neighbor for the next day's goose hunt, he and I would have to go to find an FFL. He would have to do a NICS check on the loan. And when he wanted to return it to me, we would both have to go back to the FFL and get another NICS check in order to return it to me. But the sponsors of the legislation never realized that the NICS system run by the FBI simply is not available for loans. The dealer simply isn't empowered to do a NICS check. And if the dealer attempts a NICS check on something that's not authorized by the Brady Act, that is a crime if it's done willfully. And if it's not done willfully, it could lose his dealer's license. So we made this point to the House of Delegates, and typical of the House of Delegates, unfortunately, they ignored us, but we had a better chance at persuading people in the Senate who actually took the problem seriously and looked into it and discovered, lo and behold, we were correct. So the bill was amended to eliminate that onerous loan situation, and they enforced this out of the House with a 5-year prison term. So if you actually loaned your gun to somebody and not knowing about the law, you would go to jail for 5 years. And they had no what's called mens rea or guilty mind intent to it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a strict liability statute. And it's very typical of these gun control advocates to criminalize as much as they physically can and quite severely. And then we prevailed upon the governor by pointing out that loans of long guns, Maryland already does a private sale control of handguns. Loans of long guns are simply never used in crimes, and long guns almost are never used in crimes. And we had FBI statistics on that. So in the meantime, his crime control bill, because Baltimore is completely out of control, went nowhere in the state legislature. And so we persuaded him to veto it. So we're hoping, against hope perhaps, but that when the legislature reconvenes this coming year, they will see the sense of the governor's position and not override it. Part of the problem in Maryland is that it's a one-party state in the state legislature.
Hmm.
And so they have veto-proof majorities in both houses. But so it becomes even more important then be able to persuade people by reference to the law. And that's what I do. And that's just because I know the NICS system, happens to understand how the dealer works with the FBI system and that. And you get other things where they don't understand the difference between a rifle and a pistol. And there's federal law on this. And
Hmm.
so we had another gun bill that would have banned a certain pistol that was used in a shooting in Ohio, and they put it on a long gun assault weapons list. And I pointed out in the hearings that, well, the thing that you have on your screen is not a long gun, it is a pistol. It is regulated in this following manner. And by the way, it's not legal for sale in Maryland anyhow, nor is the long gun equivalent of that, if you put a stock on it, legal for sale in Maryland already. The bill died because they were embarrassed by it. And that was a bill sponsored by the Attorney General of Maryland, who you would think would know what he was talking about,
One
but
would
didn't.
hope so, at least.
And that is so much the problem in Maryland because they have so many laws and they are so complexly written that it's very difficult for the lay public to understand them. I mean, one of our big missions of Maryland Show Issue is to educate the public mostly about these kind of laws and the interplay between Maryland law and federal law. And it's just so easy to fall into these sort of traps. A transport. You can transport your handgun to a range, for example,
Hmm.
but only as long as you're transporting it. It has to be in an enclosed case or a holster. But if you stop on the way, say to go to the mall to do a little shopping, you're out of the exception for transport, and you're immediately going to jail for 3 years. And the conviction, any kind of conviction, no matter the punishment, is a permanent lifetime disqualifier under federal law and state law. So there are all kinds of traps. We pity our neighbors to the north, Pennsylvania, because there's a section of Maryland at Cumberland and Hanover,
Hmm.
which is only a few miles wide. So the people with carry permits in Pennsylvania will be driving down Interstate 81 into West Virginia or Virginia, where they're allowed to carry as well, because the Pennsylvania permit is recognized in those states.
Hmm.
But they have to go through Maryland, and sometimes they forget to put it away, and they get caught, and they
Yep.
lose their gun rights for life
Yep.
because they're transporting it in a way that violates Maryland law.
Yeah, you
And
can
Maryland State Police
literally
have very good.
you can literally be in Pennsylvania driving south on Interstate 81 and you can be in Maryland. I think you're in Maryland for a total of 15 minutes before you're
If that.
before you're out of Maryland again. But if you get caught in that little bit of Maryland, you're in serious trouble.
Well, it's not just there. I mean, there's all kinds of side roads up in that area of the woods that break you into Maryland and back into Pennsylvania, and that cross the border all the time. And you may not even know where you are at any given one time. So, in West Virginia, of course, is constitutional carry, so they don't even think about it anymore.
Right, right. Well,
And that borders Maryland right at that border as well.
there are
So
two
it's
ways. Oh, go ahead.
no, it's a very complex system of gun laws in Maryland, and the legislators don't even understand them.
Sure. There are two ways to advance gun rights, in my opinion, that are most common. The two most common ways to advance gun rights are through legislation and through lawsuits. Is the second one. And I know that you are involved with both the Second Amendment Foundation and the Firearms Policy Coalition in a lawsuit, at least one lawsuit that was filed, I believe, back in November. Could you talk about that one for
Right.
just a little bit?
That's the call case, and it challenges the Maryland's good substantial reason in order to obtain a carry permit in Maryland. So Maryland has a statute dating back to 1972 that requires if you want to carry a handgun or any kind of loaded firearm at all, you have to be have a good substantial reason and get a permit from the state police. So otherwise you violate the handgun carry statute, which again is 3 years in prison. And this good substantial reason means whatever the state police happen to think is good enough. And they have categories. One is personal protection, in which you have to show some sort of risk to yourself that's different from the average person. Then there are the privileged groups, the people who are judges and prosecutors and lawyers with clients who are involved in criminal proceedings. They have a presumed risk kind of a category. Then, of course, there are legislators who get it for the asking, but with a wink and a nod. And you have all these categories. And one of them we've actually prevailed upon the state police to recognize is people with top secret clearance, because a lot of the federal government employees live and work in Maryland with that kind of clearance. And that's because Maryland's right in the heart of where the federal bureaucracy is, and that there's a lot of risks associated with people from terrorism against people with those kind of clearances. And we have, like, for example, the NSA is just down the street over in Fort Meade. So they get permits. And they have a long 16 hours training requirement. I'm an instructor for that, so I do that from time to time. But for the average schmo, I mean, you're basically out of luck. We have a tiny, tiny percentage of people in Maryland. I think a little over 20,000 people with carry permits for all those categories. And that includes security guards. Where in Pennsylvania, they're well over 1 million. I think close to that in Virginia as well. And of course, constitutional carry in West Virginia. So having a carry permit in Maryland is really quite difficult. And then they attach restrictions. And the restrictions have the force and effect of law. So if you're an employee of an employer that wants you to carry, like for a gun shop, you can get a permit, but they will attach a restriction while engaging in the employment of whoever the employer is. But if you carry outside that restriction, it's the same thing as having no permit at all. Again, 3 years in prison.
Wow.
So, and try to convince the trooper on the side of the road, yes, I'm in the course of my employment. Well, y'all, I don't think so. Maybe you should just tell it to the judge.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the difficulty here is, do you waive your Fourth Amendment and your Fifth Amendment and your Sixth Amendment rights on the side of the road, trying to convince the trooper that you're actually within the scope of your employment, who may have just having a bad day? Or do you insist on those rights, but get arrested for sure, and hope for heck that you get a good lawyer? And we've had people in the city of Baltimore, for example, who are arrested even with permits because they are so hostile to handguns in Baltimore among the police.
Yeah. Well, and then, of course, you're talking about the confiscation of the handgun, trying to get it back after the fact, all of which can be very problematic.
So we had a case in which a individual with a restricted carry permit, he was a veterinarian. He actually carried narcotics with him in the course of his practice, who was arrested in Montgomery County, where I live, which is right next to D.C., in which they wouldn't give his handgun back, and they dropped the charges. But the plea deal was, you give us your handgun. $1,000 handgun goes down the tubes.
Wow.
So, yep.
Maryland is, I consider Maryland a lot like I consider New York and California. It's Baltimore and Annapolis are kind of right near D.C., and then you've got a huge section of the state, the Eastern Shore, the Cumberland area, very rural, very down-to-earth people that are getting really ruled by the tyranny of the majority in Baltimore area. Am I assessing that right?
You are assessing it, and that's because the population is clustered in the suburbs of Baltimore and D.C., and Montgomery County, you have Prince George's County next to that. You have Howard County, which has turned very, very blue. You have Baltimore County, which is a mix but largely blue. And Baltimore City, which is losing population like crazy, but it's still a big urban area. Mm-hmm. And they're all represented by deep blue representatives. So that's where all the population is, that's where all the power is, and all the people in far western Maryland, which I love, on the Eastern Shore, which is rural and conservative, are basically have nothing to say about it.
Absolutely.
And that's the reality of the population of the city of Baltimore and Montgomery County. They're very anti-gun, and irrationally so,
Well, we are
because we
come.
know how this is enforced.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming up on the end of the time we have today, but uh, if you're like most, if you're like most uh, organizations that are in places that are struggling, I know Maryland Shall Issue takes members from all over the place. You don't have to live in Maryland.
Everywhere,
So,
everywhere. And this is what we use your money for. All the members of the board of directors and the officers work for free.
mhm,
I've donated all my lawyer time pro bono. None of us get paid a dime. We cover our expenses. So all of it goes pretty much to the lobbying, the legislature, or litigation. And I don't have to tell you that litigation isn't cheap.
right.
But we just filed a petition for certiorari in the Supreme Court, and here's a hard copy of it, and that is on the takings clause and the confiscation of bump stocks and what Maryland calls rapid fire triggers.
Mhm.
So this is litigation. This document costs $6,684 to print. That's just the petition.
Wow.
And if certiorari is granted, and I wrote this because for 33 years, Department of Justice is what I did, so this
Mhm.
is kind of my love. The merits briefing will be probably triple that, just in printing costs.
Holy smokes. And
That's
that
just the print.
yeah, that doesn't include the expenses of actually should it get to the Supreme Court of the actual testimony. And let's face it, I mean, you're fortunate enough you can do your work pro bono, but there are office assistants there. Nothing. There is no free lunch, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
There is no free lunch. And we hired a local counsel when it started this list, and that was tens of thousands of dollars because I can't do it all by myself.
Hmm.
So even if I write the petition, I still have to work with local counsel on this, because if we win, we have to go back, and we do a lot of trial level, and that's resource intensive.
So
And we have multiple litigation going on. And right now, we have the First Amendment litigation involving the members who were arrested on the streets of Annapolis for holding edgy signs that the governor, his office, and the state legislature didn't like very much.
yep.
That case is proceeding in district court. We have the HQL litigation because you can't buy a handgun in Maryland without a state issued handgun qualification license, and that requires live fire to get.
Hmm.
And so we're challenging that in federal district court. We just won on that, first time in the Fourth Circuit we've ever won anything. And that was on the standing issue, whether or not we had even standing to complain about the statute. So we actually won on that. That case was brought back in 2016, is back in district court now, again on cross motions for summary judgment that we're writing. So that has been very challenging. So we're busy, and we're
Yeah,
probably going to be bringing more suits. The big change is Justice Barrett on the Supreme Court. We have a different calculus now,
absolutely.
and that's going to be very interesting.
Well, we are totally out of time. But if somebody is interested in becoming a member of Maryland Shall Issue, how can they do that?
The web is the easiest way. www.marylandshallissue.org. It's all one word, marylandshallissue.org. There's a big join button on the top and donate button right next to that. But we welcome participation. And again, you can send us an email if you have any questions at info at marylandshallissue.org. And I answer that email. So we're very accessible to our members and to the public. And believe me, we get questioned every single day.
Absolutely. Well, we do have to step aside, folks. If you would, please go ahead and subscribe to our feed. Just go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And when you do, hit the bell for notifications so you know when we release another video, which we will be doing again tomorrow. Thanks for watching.